Hi, and welcome back to the Pit Lane, a Formula One podcast where we talk about everything Formula One. Will Ferrari maintain their high-flying form after a 1-2 finish at COTA, the USGP, or will McLaren and Red Bull return to the top step? Could Red Bull lose more ground in the Constructors' title fight? I am your host, Jordan Wynn, and alongside me is my co-host, Alden Kwell. How are you doing today, Alden?
I'm doing really well this week, Jordan. How are you?
Good. This week we'll talk about the Mexico GP along with a couple of the other ones we missed that we'll briefly touch on. Life gets in the way, but we'll briefly talk on the Singapore Grand Prix and the U.S. Grand Prix. But let's start with Singapore. It was kind of a boring race in my opinion. There were no safety cars, and at a Grand Prix where there always was a safety car up until this point, ended up being a really boring race with Lando just kind of driving away, Max finishing second, and Piastri third. What were your thoughts on that race?
Yeah, the lack of any sort of inclement weather and the lack of a safety car kind of nullified some of the excitement in this race. Norris winning meant that he gained more ground on Verstappen. However, Verstappen finishing second meant that the gains that he got in the drivers' championship was kind of minimal. But Piastri finishing third meant that McLaren, after already taking the lead from Red Bull at Baku, they sort of like re-solidified their lead and sort of extended it over Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship. But yeah, overall, I mean, I kind of thought it was a bit boring, but the addition of the fourth DRS sector did seem to make it a little bit easier to pass. I know a couple of years ago they removed a couple turns in the last sector, but yeah, it's sort of really difficult. Like you hear about how it's a difficult driver circuit just because of like the humidity and the heat and the stress and the stamina that's required to complete it. But even with that, it sort of felt sort of dull at best. But yeah, overall, it was kept things spicy in both of the title fights.
Yeah, it definitely did. Also, Daniel Ricciardo, it ended up being his last race. I know we briefly touched on that being potentially the case after Baku, but yeah, Daniel Ricciardo ended up getting kind of like a unceremonious goodbye. It was really weird how Red Bull as a whole handled it. But yeah, it ended up being his last probable race in F1. Definitely for this year with VCAR. But yeah, it was sad to see him go. But I mean, I think he had his time in F1 and it was great while it lasted. I enjoyed it. His personality will be missed.
Yeah, I totally agree. He did end up getting the fastest lap for that race. Even though he finished outside the points. So it's like a little something, but like you mentioned, it was rather unceremonious, which is too bad for someone that the both the paddock and a lot of the fans like.
Which also means he has a replacement. Brings back Liam Lawson. If you all remember, he was Ricciardo's replacement last year when he fractured his wrist at the Dutch Grand Prix in practice. I think he subbed in for like 4 or 6 weeks. I can't remember.
I think that sounds about right.
But yeah, he did a great job. They obviously rate him very highly. Just didn't have a spot for him at either of their teams. But now he got his chance starting with COTA, which we'll talk about right now. COTA, which we love. If you follow our podcast, we've been there and we think it's a great place to go in Austin, Texas. A lot of fun. Food's great. The racetrack's great. Scene's great. It's great atmosphere. We really enjoyed our time there when we went.
Yeah, we really can't say enough good things about it. The food, the circuit, just the atmosphere. It was all fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. It was a sprint weekend. It was the first sprint weekend we've had in a while. It was also the first weekend that was after like this long pseudo break, like 4-week break, which we had, the standard break that we normally have, but now we had another one, which was really weird based on the schedule. But yeah, sprint weekend. I think the Red Bull brought upgrades, McLaren brought upgrades, the Mercedes brought upgrades, and Max ends up winning the sprint, followed by Sainz coming back on Norris. So Sainz finished second, Norris finished third. So Norris dropping a couple points in the sprint to Max. Both the Ferraris looked really strong in the sprint race, so kind of a little bit of foreshadowing. It kind of seemed like that they had the pace to move forward during race day.
Yeah. You listed off a lot of the teams that brought upgrades. Ferrari was one that had said that they were going to bring upgrades, and then they didn't bring very many, if at all, to this race, and which was odd, just because, like you said, it was this long break. They did finish somewhat strong in Singapore. Maybe the circuit didn't quite suit their car, but they did have some really strong, races in, Italy at Monza. So maybe they felt like they didn't need them because their car had sort of come to its own. But yeah, you'd mentioned there a lot of the teams that had brought upgrades, but Ferrari sort of kind of oddly didn't bring one. But it didn't matter, because even though they had a very strong performance in the sprint race, in the main Grand Prix, they finished 1-2.
Yes, they did. It was basically turn one. Max dove up on the inside of Lando Norris. They both kind of went wide. Norris definitely got pushed off the track, and both of the Ferraris passed them both. So yeah, Charles Leclerc just kind of drove away at that point, and so did Carlos Sainz. And there was a little bit of a battle in the middle of the race, which we're talking about, between Norris and Max. Kind of toward the end of the race, Lando Norris was coming back on Max Verstappen, and coming down that back straightaway, Norris had a run on Max because that DRS zone slipstream, and he was ahead of him initially before the breaking point. Max kind of broke super late, so he was technically ahead at the apex and pushed Lando wide, but Max still made the corner just barely, and Lando just kind of kept his foot in it on the outside, even though he didn't make the corner, and passed Max, but he received a penalty for doing so. It was kind of I don't know. I guess by the letter of the law, Norris getting a penalty was the right decision. My initial reaction was the complete opposite. I know I texted you when it was going on. I was like, that's not right. But yeah, Lando got a 5-second penalty, and Max ends up Max ends up third, and Norris finishes fourth based on the penalties.
Yeah, it's sort of like a unfortunate situation with there for both of them. I don't know. Yeah, Max basically was able to maintain his position, even though neither one of them, and that's key, neither one of them really were able to keep their cars on the circuit, or the definition of the circuit, which is inside the white lines. And as a result, it was deemed that, you could have argued, oh, one of them pushed the other one wide, the other one passed while they were off circuit, blah, blah, blah. And we've heard that before, but it's all about like the apex and the braking zone and where they're able to maintain control. And all that leads into this weekend, where that sort of point had been brewing behind the scenes, basically because McLaren heading into the Mexican GP wanted to have a right to review based on the data that they collected, during the interim. And Formula One, or the stewards, basically said, yeah, we've heard what you had to say, but we're going to still say that you're wrong. And basically the positions were maintained. So at the end of the day, Norris lost points in both the sprint race and the main GP against Max at the US GP in Coda.
Yeah, it was a strange one. Kind of the letter of the law is, if you're ahead at the apex, you are technically given the right to racing space, or the corner. And since Max essentially decided not to brake until he was ahead of Lando, he was ahead at the apex. Therefore, he was entitled to all of the space he was needed, as he was technically the defending vehicle. But yeah, I don't know. It was a weird situation. But yeah, I agree with everything you said.
Yeah, because they were basically both of them going, 30 miles an hour faster through the apex than they would have on any other normal lap, just because they were both trying to be, quote unquote, the first at the apex. And they were like, basically, it's just creating a situation where drivers are dive bombing into the apex and, elbowing the other person rather dangerously at times out of the way. And it's just, that's not racing, right? That's just bullying.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I felt it was too. And Max knowing the rules. I mean, they all know the rules, but Max having kind of gone through this at one point with Lewis already in 2021, he kind of tries to push the rules as much as possible, it feels like at times. And in this case, it worked out in his favor because that's what the rules say. But yeah, that was kind of the COTA Grand Prix, or I guess USGP at COTA. One other thing to note, Hamilton exited the race after beaching his car on lap 2 in the gravel. Was it like turn like 17 or 16? I don't know. There's something weird with the Mercedes this weekend where they brought their upgrades there, and it felt like if they just hit a bump just the wrong way, they would kind of just go spinning out. I know they both did an FP1 at the same spot, and I think it's, I don't know, something with their new updates that they had that weekend.
Yeah, and Russell crashed during qualifying, I think.
Yep.
So it was weird. Yeah, it was like the penultimate corner of the circuit, sort of like the double left-handers. Yeah, but that was I forgot to include this, but that was the whole point of including it, was because that was the first safety car
in 9 races,
something like that. Yep.
I think, which was a record.
Yeah, it was Hamilton, poor guy, who beached his car.
And I mean, for safety car standards, I mean, it was lap 2, so it didn't affect the race really. It wasn't like a game changer for the race. It wasn't lap,
right?
In the middle of the pit stops or whatever. So it was just a safety car, kind of more standard stuff versus something that was a game changer for the race. Anyways,
yep.
Let's get into some news. End of an era. Lasted about 5 years. The fastest lap is being removed and will not return in 2025 going forward.
Points for the fastest lap. People can still set fastest lap.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Excuse me. That's right. That's true. They're allowed.
They are allowed. Yeah, this was somewhat short-lived. 5 years, thereabouts. 6 years, actually, I think. 2019 to 2024. Yeah. I don't know. I think we were both skeptical when they announced that this was going to be introduced back in 2018 for the 2019 season. But I think at times it has felt like it's been interesting, and it's brought an element back into the racing at the end of the race where some positions are already like sort of a foregone conclusion. So I'm a little conflicted about this leaving. I don't think it was ultimately meaningful for championship finishes, but I guess it's nice to have, but will we totally miss it? No, probably not. What are your thoughts, Jordan?
I agree. It was kind of an interesting thing to add at one point, but I kind of agree that it kind of felt gimmicky. I know it sounds like they use it in other series as well, but they probably utilize it a little bit better in a more, factory spec system versus F1. So yeah, I'm okay with it being removed. We'll see what happens going forward, but yeah, it's kind of gotten gimmicky kind of toward the end, with Ricciardo getting the fastest lap, taking it away from Lando, which is fine because it's allowed. He just doesn't get a point. It also happened. I think it happened at COTA too, right? I think Colapinto had the fastest lap.
Yeah.
And then that got taken away.
Yeah.
And I think it happened in Mexico too. So, I mean, and nobody's getting a point for it. So I'm like, does it matter? I don't know. In the end, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference. The point scale in F1 now is no longer that small margin where I think 1 point is going to matter. You can say, okay, the 2021 championship when they were tied going to the last race, but in the end it didn't matter, right? Because there's still a 7-point gap, so didn't matter. There's so many points to give out. see it being needed, especially with these sprint races.
No, yeah, you're right. Maybe they'll take it away, think up what they can do, and bring it back sometime later. But overall, it is what it is.
Right. And on back to the Mexico Grand Prix, which happened this past weekend. Getting to practice right away. Albon crashed into Bierman, which was Charles Leclerc's car in FP1, as it was kind of one of those young driver weekends. I think there were 5 young drivers, is that right? That
Yep.
piloted their superiors' vehicles, I guess we could say. But yeah, Albon crashed into Bierman, so it was unfortunate for both of them. And Antonelli was in for Mercedes, who obviously has a seat next year with Mercedes. Robert Schwartzman drove for Sauber, Drugovich in the Aston Martin, and Pato O'Ward, who, if you don't know, is a IndyCar driver for McLaren.
And Mexican, so this was like his home weekend in a sense.
True. Yep. Did you know that I think they're talking about maybe IndyCar going down there too for a race?
I did not hear that, but that would be rather interesting.
Yeah, they were in talks. I think I know NASCAR does it, so I think IndyCar is trying to get in there too, since Pat O'Ward has been doing really well in IndyCar. But just kind of a side tangent.
Yeah. NASCAR does it at a different circuit, right? But would you have any idea whether if IndyCar would be doing it at the Mexican circuit in Mexico City?
I guess I don't know. I just saw the headlines and that they were in talks about it and potentially bringing it there. But yeah, okay. It would be cool if it was there and just get another comparison track. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
FP2 was a 90-minute session this week, which is, if you don't know, is odd. Normally there's 60 minutes. There's a 30-minute session extended for Pirelli to test their tires for 2025. And Russell crashed his car at turn 8. So another weekend where Russell crashed his car. I know Toto Wolff was kind of getting concerned about the cost cap as they're bringing upgrades and trying to, kind of compete at the end of the year and for next year. And Russell's has these few crashes back-to-back weekends. That's never a good thing. McLaren's. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, just one quick comment on that. Toto Wolff has talked about it, obviously, because it's impacting his team. That's the danger you take flying close to the sun, right? You want to spend money on upgrades, and then, your drivers go out and crash the cars, whether you believe it's their fault or not. They ultimately crash the cars. And that's sort of the dichotomy of this situation, right? The cost cap is the same for everyone. Everyone has to play by the same rules. And if you crash your cars, you will end up spending more fixing them. I kind of don't have any sympathy. I mean, I just that. It's the main decision that you have to make as a team principal is how close to the sun do you want to fly? And if you're flying that close, you have to take the licks when they come. You know what I mean?
Yep, that's right. I mean, Red Bull had their penalty last year for this year, losing wind tunnel time, which I think is the right thing to do. Right. And I think that's especially a fair thing to do at that point where, for something like this. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, they still have 4 races left. Plenty of crashes possible, especially with their upgrades. They don't really seem like they understand them very well. So yeah, we'll see what happens. McLaren's were at top of the table in FP3 and nothing too exciting in there, which brings us into qualifying. Q1 was interesting with, you look to see who goes out in Q1, Guan Yu Zhou was out, Ocon was out. Colapinto was out, which is actually kind of a little bit of a surprise, but then the big ones were Perez and Piastri. Piastri's best lap was deleted. He went wide after that back straightaway, getting into the stadium section. Just broke way too late. And yeah, his time got eliminated. And I think he was on a used set at that time too. And tried to go again. It was just too slow. And Perez was just slow on the weekend. And he, at his home race, didn't make it out of Q1.
Yeah, it meant that some fast cars were going to start the race from the back. There haven't been very many penalties for new components for some of the drivers at the front of the grid. So having these two at the back was both something that we hadn't seen for a while, but also meant that they were going to be passing a lot of cars as they went through the field. But yeah, it was kind of awkward seeing both of them back there. I mean, Perez, in front of his home crowd, you would have thought maybe he would have done better, but the Piastri one I think was even more of a head scratcher. He just wasn't close to Lando's performance in Q1, which was weird. I mean, did you hear or see anything that would have sort of lead you to believe why either of these two went out, other than them just being slow and Piastri's one lap being deleted?
No, well, other than Piastri's, I mean, that kind of made sense to me. The track is still ramping up, right? They don't run support races and stuff there. It's dusty the first weekend. They gotta, grip up the track and everything. Piastri's lap being deleted for track limits, and he was on a used set with a limited amount of time to go, so we kind of had to just go again. So that makes sense to me. Perez, I don't know. Maybe I missed it, but yeah, Perez, just unfortunate that he was just that slow and that far behind. I mean, Max, that shouldn't be happening, but Perez's confidence has to be at an all-time low. I mean, it's just hasn't been good for him most of the season, other than maybe the first two races. That'll bring us into Q2. Bottas, Stroll, Alonso, Lawson, and Tsunoda were knocked out. A lot of people didn't get their second or third runs in, depending on when they're running, as Yuki crashed at turn 12, kind of negating basically everybody's laps. I think he was an earlier lap goer at that point, or earlier runner. So, yeah, not too many people got their second or third laps in. But that also meant both Haas's made it into Q3 without having to go again. So that's huge for Haas. They've been on a good run of form lately. They've moved up to P6 in the standings after Coda. So, yeah, they've had a really good run of it as of late.
Yeah, it was nice to see Bottas out there in Q2. Mexico City always offers something different with the higher elevation, where downforce, cooling, brakes, they all interact with the air and everything differently. So he was eliminated in Q2, but it was nice to see him there. And too bad for both Lawson and Tsunoda, who had both been doing well both of this weekend, but over the last couple of weekends. I guess Tsunoda had some difficulty in Coda, but Lawson and Colapinto, had been fighting and duking it out. So, Colapinto out in Q1, Bottas out in Q2, both of the V carbs out in Q2. So it was a little weird, but yeah, nice seeing the Haas's get into Q3. Hopefully, not to create any predictions, but it would be nice to see them score some points during the race. I guess we'll get there later, but.
Getting to Q3, Max had his first lap deleted for corner cutting in turn 2. It's one of those almost 90-degree corners. He kind of just cut it. I mean, I think he cut turn 3 as well. If I remember correctly, that's what it looked like to me. But yeah, he ends up getting his first lap deleted, his banker lap, but still has a really good second lap. He ends up P2 in qualifying. Carlos Sainz, both of his laps were fast enough for pole. Ferrari was flying in qualifying and in the race, so that was huge for him, especially since he's leaving Ferrari at the end of the year. Lando Norris was P3, Leclerc was P4. He had a little bit of a wiggle, I think out of like turn 7 or 8, that fast S section. Russell after that, Hamilton, Magnussen, Gasly, Albon, and Hulkenberg rounded out your top 10.
Yeah, odd man out there is definitely Gasly, not only making it into Q3, but qualifying ahead of Albon and Hulkenberg. Did you know if Alpine had upgrades this weekend? Because it's also a bit of a discrepancy between Gasly and Ocon.
I think they brought that. I think Gasly had it at Coda, and I think they both had it this weekend at Mexico, okay. I think was the thing. So maybe Gasly just had more time to adapt to it. And he dealt with it last weekend. I'm not sure, but still, like you said, I feel like Mexico always has, you usually get a couple, random teams or drivers that have a solid qualifying just because of the circumstances. But yeah, it was interesting to see Gasly up there as Ocon was out in Q1 as well. So yeah, it was good to see him there.
Yeah.
So we can get into the race. having Carlos Sainz at P1, Max P2, and Norris P3. I know after qualifying, initially my first thoughts were, oh, this will be a fun turn one, as it's a long run down to turn one off that main straightaway into a 90-degree corner. So that's kind of what I expected. Sainz started in the pole. He lost first place to Max in a turn one. Norris was also behind. I think he stayed in P3 though. There's also a crash initially after the first straightaway. Yuki Tsunoda and Alex Albon made contact. Albon was trying to back out as he was getting squeezed by Gasly going down to the main straight. Tsunoda was trying to go around the outside and kept his foot in, and he was in the grass at one point, but kept going. But yeah, ultimately ended making contact with Albon's front left with his rear right, and he kind of got airborne, almost hit a cameraman. He did hit the camera with his rear spoiler. Luckily, everybody's okay. But yeah, Yuki Tsunoda was out in the first straightaway, and so was Alex Albon. So creating a safety car right away with Max leading, followed by Sainz and Norris.
Yeah, it was a hectic start. Lots of, like you mentioned, there were no support races at the circuit this weekend, so there's like a lot of dust offline. And once you get into that, it's a really long straight, like you mentioned. Once you get down to that turn one complex, it just gets super dusty. Feel bad for Tsunoda. He was trying to, put his car into a tight position, and it didn't work out. He's not really raced. He hasn't completed a lot of laps over the last couple of weekends. Just feel bad for him a little bit, but ultimately he has really only himself to blame.
I don't think he's completed a race in 3 races in in Mexico. I think he's gone out in turn one.
That's tough. That is tough. But yeah, like you mentioned, Albon, he did get a little bit further up the road before he retired, but he ended up having a broken suspension. So there's just no way for him to get back to the pits. Yeah, we ended up having 7 laps under the safety car or something. Maybe not quite that many. But it was basically, return to form. Burt Meilander making his money. Safety car 2 races in a row. And, not that we wish ill on anyone, but that's how it should be.
Yeah. Yeah, and then going after the safety car, a couple of laps into that, Carlos Sainz gets past Max again on lap 9, getting it a turn one. It was a heck of a dive bomb, too, and not very many people will catch Max out by surprise, and I think he definitely did get him going into turn one. He sent it from quite a ways away, but clearly Sainz knew he had to get past him if he wanted to just take off in the race, as the Ferrari was quick, but, with the cooling issues and everything else, you need to get out in front and clean air, and he did just that. I think on that same lap, right, where Norris and Max had their issues together.
Yep. So Max ended up, fighting for that position, like you mentioned, against Sainz, but Norris basically was able to sort of close that gap. And even though Sainz got ahead in the turn 1, 2, 3 complex, by the time they got to turns 4 and 5, Norris had basically got under the back wing of Max.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, here's all the chaos. It was that lap or the next lap? Lando goes for a pass on Max on the outside of, I believe, turn 4, and Max just shoves him wide. And this time, Lando was out in front on the apex, technically. And he cuts the corner. Lando had to cut the corner, and he actually cut in front of Carlos as well. But he gave that position back, but he stayed in front of Max. And after going through the 2 90-degree corners, I believe, 5 and 6, they come up to turn 7, and Max just doesn't even brake for turn 7, shoves them both wide. I mean, Lando wasn't that close to the barriers, but it kind of felt like he was fairly close just to avoid Max. And Max ends up with 2 10-second penalties, one for basically shoving Lando off the track in turn 4, and then another 10 seconds for leaving the track and getting an advantage. bypassing and pushing Lando out wide on turn 7. In turn, this also let Charles Leclerc by. So now both the Ferraris are in front, 1-2, just driving away.
Driving away, clean air, and Lando and Max, both of them have extremely dirty tires, cooled off tires from being off the circuit and struggling to get back. Not only into position, but back on the racetrack, just like driving all over the place. It was a wild couple corners. It was chaos. I think you mentioned earlier is the perfect word to describe what, those 30 seconds of racing.
Yeah, and I don't know. It really felt like Max tried to have a repeat of Coda in that first set of corners, and I think he was just mad at the second set where he shoved Max off and didn't really brake. And it's not even really a passing opportunity there either, where he ends up getting, 20 seconds worth of penalties, which effectively is entirely another pit stop as well.
Yeah, the first penalty is kind of like, hey, by the letter of the law, this is a penalty. We're going to issue you a 10-second penalty. But the second one was just straight up dangerous and like egregious.
Agreed.
So, yeah, he ended up having 20 seconds of penalties. He has no one to blame but himself for that. And
completely deserved.
Completely deserved. Yeah. That's a good way to put it as well.
But let's get back to who actually won the race. Carlos Sainz. He kind of just drove away with it. The Ferraris were fast, obviously, all in qualifying and in the weekend. I know Leclerc tried to come back at Carlos on the second stint. But at that point, his engine was started to overheat. He had to do a lot of lift and coasting toward the end of the race, which actually brought Lando back into the mix. Lando's pace was really good in the second stint on the hard tires, and Leclerc had a moment getting onto the front straightaway. He almost lost it into the barriers, but he saved it, and Norris got past him there with a couple of laps left. And so Carlos Sainz drove away, wins the race. Lando ends up second. Charles Leclerc, a P3 in the end. So yeah, Ferrari gains massive points. Again, back-to-back weekends on both McLaren and Red Bull. They move up to second in the constructor standings, which is obviously huge. And I think they're only 20-some points behind McLaren now as well for the constructors title. So that's huge. And I think this is the first time since like the 70s that there's six drivers that have won at least 2 races in a year
correct.
Or something like that, which is insane. And I know we have more races now than we used to, but it's still a crazy stat in this era of F1 for sure.
No, yeah. This season has turned out to have quite a bit of good racing, both amongst constructors and drivers. Those stats that you just listed off, 2 race winners from 6 different drivers is insane. It's been exciting to watch it all, and this race didn't disappoint as well either. You're just talking about like the front 3, we're highlighting Sainz finishing first, Norris second, Leclerc third. Until Leclerc pitted to try and get fastest lap, they're like the next closest car was so far behind.
And it was Russell or Hamilton, yeah. And he was 30 seconds
behind.
40 seconds. Was it a minute?
Yeah. All right. I can't quite
I think he was a minute behind Carlos.
There you go.
Yeah, but I think he was like 30 seconds behind Leclerc, which is still crazy in P3.
Insane. Yeah.
Yeah, the form that Ferrari's in and McLaren in have been really good. But yeah, it's fun to see. It's fun to watch F1 right now, definitely. But yeah, like I said, Sainz P1, Leclerc P3 for Ferrari. Norris P2 gains 10 point of Max in the standings. I think now he needs, I think I saw just under 12 points a race. So technically he needs 12 points a race to win the championship comparatively to Max, which is still a long shot, still possible. Piastri, he had a comeback drive, ends up P8. I think he split the Haas drivers. He didn't quite get there on Kevin Magnussen, but ends up P8. And so I think that was
Spoilers.
Spoiler. What was the spoiler? We're talking about Mexico Grand Prix.
Yeah.
But yeah, huge for Piastri to get back after his poor qualifying. We can get into Red Bull. Max, after all of his penalties and everything else, he ends up P6. And I think, wasn't Magnussen coming up on Max as well at the end of the race?
I think so, yeah.
The Red Bull just didn't have it on the hard tires on the second stint. Yeah, it's kind of his own fault. I mean, it was his own fault, really. Perez had a day. To piggyback on his qualifying, he had a battle with Liam Lawson, which is potentially his replacement, either next year or maybe later this year, as rumors start to swirl. Really tough weekend. He sustained damage trying to pass Lawson. My opinion on the incident was, I think Lawson kept his ground. I think he just positioned it well. I think Perez just went for a gap that kind of really wasn't there, and Lawson just held on. But I digress. There was damage on Perez, and Perez also got
a lot of damage.
Yeah, I mean, he had a couple small holes in his side pod, wing damage. I think he lost some floor.
Part of the floor, yeah.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate for Perez in his home race. But yeah, it was just...
Yeah, and even to like before the race even started, he started outside the pit box, or sorry, not the pit box, but the starting grid spot. And he ended up having a 5-second penalty after like the first or second lap because they said it was a false start, but he basically started too far ahead in his box.
Yeah, the line that his wheel was supposed to be on was behind his front tire.
Not good.
No, and the radio messages, he was very adamant that, oh, no, I was on it, and, I had a good start. It was a great start, but...
It was a good start. He just started like 5 feet too far forward.
Right. Ultimately, Perez ends up P17. Yeah, it was just not a good weekend for him. Not a good weekend for Red Bull as a whole. They moved down to P3 in the championship, which is, I mean, bad by their standards, as the start of the season felt like a repeat of last year.
Yeah, you at this, sort of like halfway through the season, you would have thought, wow, like McLaren's coming good, but Red Bull may still have this. They finished first in a 1-horse race, and then all of a sudden it's looking like, oh man, McLaren's coming around, like there's going to be like a real battle, or it might finish second. And now like it's looking like they're going to finish third in a 2-horse race, even though like Ferrari's come up really quick. But like, dude, Red Bull's form has just evaporated.
And Max is going to win the title. I mean, probably, right?
Yeah.
But like,
it would require him not to finish a race to basically like lose his driver's championship at this point. But
it's
wow,
insane. And going into next year, like the regulations, yeah, they change a little bit, but it's not a major overhaul next year. So we expect a lot of carryover to next year, and it'll be interesting moving into the end of this year and into next year to see what happens.
Yeah.
And with all the
Mercedes had a good weekend.
Yeah, in the end, I mean, P4, P5, it's the best they could have asked for. Hamilton ends up P4. He had a really good battle with Russell for 10 or 12 laps, it felt like.
Yeah.
Passed his teammate with like about 10 laps to go or so. And yeah, ends up P4. Russell P5. Basically just battle his teammate all day long. But yeah, it was a good battle between those two. There's not much more they could have asked for out of the weekend, other than maybe Russell not crashing. But
yeah, in the free practice session, Hamilton went and showed basically the rest of the drivers out on the grid how you pass your teammate or someone that you're associated with, but you don't need to force the issue when your car's on the line. Perez squeezing his car into that turn 4 or 5 complex is like, that's not the best place to pass. Like, I know you're trying to make up lost ground because you qualified 18th, but man, turn 1 and 2 are the best places to pass. And if that's not where you're passing or on the straight, like, give it another lap, man. It's okay. Like, you don't need to put your car into a compromising position. And Hamilton showed why that's the case this weekend.
Yeah, he just stayed steady and stuck with it and eventually got by and did his thing. I think he's probably excited to move to Ferrari next year.
Oh, he's salivating, man.
No, kind of middle of the season, we're like, oh, Mercedes just won back-to-back races. What's happening? And now it's like, oh, Ferrari's just on this stint of great form, and Mercedes has no idea what they're doing. It feels like, but anyways, so good weekend for them. Haas, let's talk about our favorite American team. Stars and stripes, red, blue, white. I think the other news thing we missed is their partnership with Toyota Gazoo.
Oh yeah, we did miss that. That's
But
some news.
We'll talk about the race first. They end up P7, P9. Kevin Magnussen, P7, Hulk P9. It was a great weekend for them. They extend their lead on VCarb for 6th place. Huge points for them. I think they have, big things going for them in the future with their partnership with Toyota Gazoo Racing. It's now on the rear wing. They're in a technical partnership. It'll be great. I'm actually very excited to see what Haas does with, their Ferrari engines and gearboxes and then everything else. They're partnered with Toyota. So if you know anything about endurance racing, rally racing, they're very good there as well. So it'll be fun.
Yeah, this is sort of like the crowning achievement for this this collective at Haas this year. Both Magnussen and Hulkenberg will be out of the team next year. Hopefully this isn't just like two drivers in good form and that they regress next year, but they've got some good talent coming in next year. We got Ocon and Bierman. I think the future is bright at Haas, like you mentioned. Toyota Gazoo coming in and doing their thing. Hopefully it all clicks in the same way, right? You're changing two of the most important people at the team, arguably, and the drivers. So hopefully that doesn't sort of change the recipe too much where things don't work well. But I'm excited for it, and I'm eager to see how it works out for him next year as well.
Definitely. And we also missed their livery at Coda with the big old eagle head on their side pod with the stars behind it. I think it looked really clean. If you haven't seen it, look it up. Look great.
It did look really clean. It introduced some blue into the livery as well. Clearly, I missed a lot writing the script this week, so apologies to everyone because I know there's some livery chat listeners, and we failed you on that one.
Yeah, but that was the big one. We love that one, and it was good to see. And we get an Alpine. Gasly ends up P10 in his car. Yeah, I know he started what? Where did he start? 7th? Is that what it was? 8th? Started 8th. Ends up 10th. Gets a point for Alpine, so great for them. Great for him. He's the mainstay at Alpine now going forward. So good to see him do that. Ocon ends up P13. I don't think I ever saw him in the race. I don't know about you, but yeah.
Unless he was getting passed by someone. Yeah, I didn't really see him. Or if there were some battles sort of like as people were exiting the pits. I don't remember seeing him much this weekend, but ultimately he survived the kerfuffle down at turn 1 on lap 1 and finished P13 when he started P19. And, there were some DNFs, but it's a good drive from him, honestly.
Definitely. Aston Martin, another one of those weekends where you don't see much of them either. Lance Stroll ends up P11. Fernando Alonso DNF'd his 400th Grand Prix weekend. It's not his 400th start, mind you. It was his 400th Grand Prix weekend, which seems odd because I think his 400th Grand Prix start is going to be in Qatar, technically. Yeah. I don't know, but I digress. 400th weekend, DNF'd, issue with the car. I think I also saw that in his 200th and 300th. He also DNF'd. So,
oh no!
So maybe just these weekends just don't show up. I don't know, or maybe just do practice and then don't do the race so you don't DNF in the race. Williams Colapinto ends up P12. He got a 10-second penalty with incident with Lawson as well. Seemed like he was too aggressive in turn 2. And I know he wasn't very happy about that either. We talked about Albon earlier in the race with damage with Tsunoda backing out between the sandwich with Tsunoda and Gasly. They also had a special livery this weekend with a splash of yellow. I don't know if it's going to stay that way going forward, though, with the new sponsorship. I don't know if that's what it was. I think it's an Argentine package. Is that what it was?
Yeah, I think it. I think it comes with Colapinto somehow. It did look good. I did like that splash of yellow. I also don't know if it'll stick around, but considering that they're going down to Brazil this next weekend, you would almost
guarantee it'll be there.
Stay there. Yeah, come on.
Yeah. It looked good. A little splash of yellow never hurt anybody.
Yeah, and Colapinto's look good. That he got his elbows out. He did get the penalty for that. He wasn't happy. Lawson kind of crashed into just about everyone this weekend, but I feel like that was a deserved 10-second penalty, all things considered. Did you feel differently? I don't know. What was your view on that
It seemed fair. It seemed fair. I know the penalties changed this year. We haven't had a lot of these penalties until late, like this race and last weekend, that they actually changed them to 5 to 10 seconds. So yeah, I think it was fair. I don't see anything wrong with it, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree.
So, Kick Sauber, Bottas P14, Zhou P15. I mean, that car is just garbage, really. It's not good. We're still waiting for the Audi investment to kick in at some point. I don't know what they're doing, trying to do. But yeah, they better start at some point here. Otherwise, they're in big trouble when they come into F1 in 2026.
Yep.
V-Carb, Lawson, we talked about. He ends up P16 in the end. He had some front wing damage as well. Could have had a better race. Just had, a couple scraps. Probably not completely necessary, but I know he's trying to show his intent to try and get the Red Bull seat. So I understand why he's doing what he's doing, I guess, in my opinion. And Yuki with the DNF. How do you feel about Lawson's day in Mexico?
Yeah, he's racing rather aggressive, both this weekend in Mexico and in the USGP down in Austin. He's getting his elbows out. He's taking the fight to established drivers, whether it's Perez or Fernando Alonso, who he got into some words with in Austin. But ultimately, I think he's a really talented driver. He's maybe driving a little too aggressive to try and prove a point that he deserves the Red Bull seat. If he takes the time to sort of like analyze this weekend, he could probably come to the conclusion that Perez is doing all the damage that will help Lawson all by himself. And that's simply just like finishing the race, not getting into fights with Colapinto, not damaging her car. Maybe he's got to let Perez through and just like, hey, dude, bringing that car through to a points finish when Yuki crashes out, it's all the more you got to do to sort of keep your name in that fold. But they've got a couple, maybe 2 months ago, you thought, oh man, you got 5 drivers for 4 seats. Now you're kind of looking at it and you're like, oh my gosh, do you only have
3 drivers for 4 seats?
3 drivers for 4 seats. If Red Bull's losing drivers this quickly, it's going to be Max driving all 4 cars next year.
I mean, to be fair, he'd probably still win the championship by himself.
Yeah, he'd still end up winning.
Yeah, but no, I get your point. I'm kind of in the same view. I mean, Perez feels like he's doing the damage to himself already. There's no way they keep him next year, in my opinion, but we can talk about that later. But yeah, who were your winners this weekend at the Mexican Grand Prix?
My winners are Ferrari as a team. Another solid finish. Wasn't quite a 1-2, but leapfrogging Red Bull and closing the gap substantially on McLaren in the Constructors Championship. You know, they're not likely to win, you know, unless Max and Lando crash into each other every race here on out. None of their drivers would probably win the Drivers' Championship. But man, that car has really found form with fewer upgrades of late than other teams around them. And it just goes to show that how much they're able to extract from this version of the car. And yeah, Lewis Hamilton's got to be very happy to be going to Ferrari next year. So very happy that Sainz won. Leclerc's had a, you know, aside from that near crash at the end of the race, he's had some good weekends as well. And yeah, the team's just like on the right track. What about you? Who's your winner for this weekend? And do you argue with my point on Ferrari at all?
No, I agree. I agree. Ferrari's in a really good point, or in a really good, ever since their upgrades from Monza that really brought them to the forefront in these kind of lower-ish downforce tracks. They've been solid, and they brought no upgrades to Dakota. They won there. They went 1-2. They went 1-3 here in Mexico. Brazil, I don't know how Brazil will go. I think it'll be another good track for them, as there's not a lot of high-speed corners. So I think it seems like they'll do well there. So they're looking, and they're really going for that first place in the constructor standings, which kind of seemed crazy when we were partway through the season. They seemed like they were outsiders, even potentially, you know, looking behind Mercedes when Mercedes got a couple back-to-back wins.
Yeah.
So it's fun to see Ferrari there. I'm kind of hoping they pull it out. It'd be fun. And if they don't win the constructors, it'll set a record for them not winning the constructors standings for them. It'll be
time duration.
Yes, it'll be a 16-year gap at least. Their record is 15, which I think was twice. It's been, I think 2008 was the last year that they won the constructors. So yeah, they need it right now. But anyways, my winner, Haas this weekend. Double points finish. They're in great form right now. I don't know what else there is to say about them at this point. They've proven over the past 3-4 race weekends that they've bringing these smaller upgrades instead of whole packages, which they did under Gunther Steiner, has been paying off. So yeah, major credit to them at the second half of the season. Losers. Yeah, sorry.
No. Just quickly, I wholeheartedly agree. It's been nice to see the team sort of regain some form. You know, with all these sort of teams sort of coming out of nowhere, you know, or, you know, McLaren's development race this year just being outrageous. Ferrari all of a sudden coming out of nowhere, you know, Lando coming up and making, you know, fighting for the Drivers' Championship. You know, some people might be looking side-eyed over at Haas like, hey, can you leapfrog Aston Martin for P5 in the Constructors' Championship? It's a long way, but, you know, if you keep scoring 10 points a weekend, you could do it.
Yeah, especially with the form that Aston Martin's in.
Yeah.
No, they look good. They were one of the teams at the beginning of the year that we were all, I mean, even partway into the year, me and you were talking about how we wanted them to sell to Andretti, right? And now with the way that they've been bringing upgrades and they have a new partnership with Toyota, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. And maybe it was one of those pressured things with Andretti trying to get a seat at the table that they needed to do something. And have a big splash, but hey, I'm glad they're doing it, and I hope it pays off long term for them.
Right on.
Losers. I see here that we can't. I feel like there's no other person we could have chosen or team. I mean, maybe you could have chosen Red Bull as a whole,
or Yuki. Poor guys had some rough race weekends, but
the Red Bull conglomerate.
I mean, maybe that's what we do.
Maybe that is what we do, and maybe that's fair. I think we change it on the spot.
Actually, yeah. Now that you bring that out there, that's exactly what I'll do. P16 for Lawson, P17 for Perez, that your sister teams are fighting out on track, swearing at each other, giving the finger to one another. Max is running off drivers off the circuit, getting 20 seconds worth of penalties, and Yuki DNFs after a crash on lap 1. If your car's Red Bull blue, boy, tough weekend.
Yeah. Let's do that. That works for me too. Yeah, terrible weekend for all of them. We'll see what the driver situation holds going forward. I know what today is, like a Tuesday, a couple of days after the race, but they already had talked about there's always the Red Bull rumor mill of, when is Perez's seat going to be up? Perez's dad made some comments on Instagram. I don't know if you saw that about maybe Mexico being his last race. I like Horner saying he can't guarantee that that Perez is going to finish out the year. I don't know. I don't know how you put Lawson in that seat after 2 races. I just don't get it. They've already basically said Yuki doesn't deserve a seat. I don't know what's happening at that camp. They're all over the place. So yeah, I'm in the same boat as you.
I'm glad we came to the same conclusion on that, because that was a wild ride this weekend for both of those teams.
Yeah, for sure. But that brings us to Brazil next week. Very excited. I feel like that race is always fun. I believe it's another sprint weekend as well.
That's awesome. Brazil and Coda have really sort of like stuck out as places where the sprint weekends work. Not only work, but like are probably better weekends than this normal structure.
Yes, I agree completely. And it's been that way in the past couple of years. It's worked out really well. Very excited. Brazilian fans always great atmosphere. Excited to see it.
50% chance of rain no matter what.
Yeah, no kidding.
Which is great. Makes for good strategy. It's a great circuit for racing. Love the compact nature. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully there's some interesting liveries or helmets that we can talk about.
We'll probably have 6 different set of helmets.
If not more.
Nothing wrong with that. But this is what happens when we go to Brazil. Very excited.
Yep.
Yeah, this has been your host, Jordan Wynn and Alden Kwell. Thank you for listening to The Pit Lane, and we will see you next week.
See you next weekend, Jordan.